Hello and welcome to this lab on UV mapping. Okay, what's UV mapping firstly? Well, very briefly, UV mapping is the process of applying a 2D image onto 3D surfaces. So you can see this example here. There's this image kind of wrapped around on the surfaces of the sphere, and that's kind of what we cube even, and that's what we want to do with UV mapping. We want to tell the 3D software where an image should be placed on surfaces. Usually when we do this, we use a UV checker. There are maps that look like this. They're just kind of squares. With a checker, we can check things like here, you notice on the left, there's this, what we have streaking. That's when the squares aren't even. So you can see there a good example and a bad example. The reasons for that is you can end up applying a texture, say a brick texture to an object. It doesn't look like brick there at all. That's because this bit isn't being mapped properly, but you can see the surface is okay, but then this bit isn't. So another example, this is good with the UV checker, this is bad. Lots of kind of streaking, it doesn't know where to apply the image. So that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to walk you through how to make sure you have good UV mapping on your 3D objects. We're going to use a checker that I like to use all the time. I use this one. This is just my favorite kind of checker. I can tell easily where the top parts are, and I just like it. Okay, so if you open up apartment_start, we're going to UV map this kind of scene that I've built. So we want to get to a point where this is applied nicely on all of these objects. Firstly, we're going to make the material that we're going to put the UV checker on. So if you press M to bring up your material editor, let's just bring in an Arnold surface material, standard surface. So in there, Arnold under surface, you should have standard surface. Take that in. Now, if you open the resources folder, you should have the UV checker. So just drag that onto your material editor. And we're going to apply that to the base color. And we'll need it to show on the object. So I'm just going to move my window so I can see an object. We're going to start with this cube. So if you select a cube, press C, focus on it, right click, unhide, hide under selected. So if I press M, I'll drag that onto, and I'm going to click up here and make sure that we show it in the viewport. Yeah, so you can see a standard cube in 3ds Max comes pretty much ready to go UV mapped. But let's have a look at what that map's doing anyway. So if you go into the modifier panel, add a unwrap UVW modifier. This is the main one we're going to use. Now we can click open up UV editor, and you're going to see what's going on here. So every square is just kind of aligned perfectly with the UV map. So if I select here, I can actually choose to show my texture. So I can click up here, then go map 1, and you can see what's going on here. Now, in this UV editor, we can play around with the position of all our UVs. So if I select everything and move that around, you can see what's going on here. And I'm just undoing that. The way this works is we've got all this space to work with. We could actually do this. If I hold control, it locks it. What happens here is now this will tile along the surface. So this little square, we'd imagine it just tiling along, and you can see the effect of that on the cube. So if we were to have an object that's going to have a very detailed map, like say this fabric, so that would need to be tiled quite a lot across the surface of an object. We would want to increase the size of that on the object. Generally, we're allowed to do this in architectural modeling. If you were modeling for games, we usually want to keep all of the UVs inside one square, because we end up doing things like shadow mapping and everything, where we want to bake on textures into here. So we can't actually tile, but in architectural modeling, we're okay generally tiling things. So we're going to end up tiling quite a lot of our objects, but just be aware that if you were making games, you would want everything to be, all your UVs to be packed in one square. Okay, so that was a very easy one for that square. Let's unhide everything and let's go and look at something else. So one thing just to make sure of, if you can't click out, that's because I've got this polygon selected here. So I'm going to deselect that, and I'm going to click on this desk, and we'll do this desk next. So this desk comes in two parts. There's the top part and the bottom part here. If you select the top part and the bottom, then right click, hide unselected. Let's UV map this one now. So if we apply this checker material to this table here, assigned to selection, we can see that this map is not good yet. Reason being, we got all this squished detail here. We want all of these squares to actually be squares. So even this one might look okay, but it's not really, because these aren't perfect cubes, they are rectangles. We need everything to be square. So let's fix this. And and the other thing is that if we put a wood texture on, this texture would be squished, especially here. It wouldn't look right. So we need to fix these UVs. You can see how this was modeled. I've left a modifier stack, which you should do with your objects. We don't want to collapse things, just because we want to work on the lowest edible poly at that point to use our UVs, so we have less polygons to work with. If we did a UV map on top, we would have to deal with all these little chamfered bits, which is awkward. But if we do our UV map before that chamfer, we don't have to deal with them, and it's going to be a lot easier. So I'm going to add a modifier, which is the unwrap UVW. If you select that, then we want to put it before that chamfer, and we're going to work from here. So if you select this top face, you can see that I can't actually see what I've selected. Just make sure you hide that modifier on top, the chamfer modifier. Now we can see what we've selected. We're going to use a projection, and what projection does is it takes a polygon and projects it as though we're looking right down. Kind of takes a snapshot as though we're looking at it in orthographic from the top. And you'll see how that kind of works in a second. But what I want to do is I want to think of all the ones in the same plane, the polygons in the same plane for this one. So I'm going to think about this top one and then this bottom one, the lines that we go through. So I'm going to select those two, the top and bottom. I'm going to click planar mapping here, and now that's already started to work. If we click open UV editor, we'll see what's going on. Now what we have, if I untake that projection there and move these over, we've got two on top of each other. But if I select this, click here, and then do that, we can see each one. It's taken these two here and made them perfect squares. Now we don't want them to be perfect squares because this isn't a perfect square. So how can we do that? Well, so instead, once we've done our projection, we can do quick peel here, and what that's going to do is take it with its normal shape. So we've got that shape there. I'm going to select this one, quick peel, and now we've got these two in the right shape, and you can see we've now got perfect squares. Excellent. Now we're going to do the same for the sides. So if I select this side and this side, then I might be able to just do quick peel straight away. Yep. If I do quick peel, boom, we've got these shapes now, which is what we want. And let's do these ones. So this one. Quick peel is a good tool just because it quickly takes them in the right shape. Now we've got pretty much perfectly mapped object right there. So if this was a game, we would want to pack all these UVs, which means we want them to all be in that square. So if I highlight them all, I can go up to here, Tools, Pack UVs. Then you get this little dialog here. We want to normalize clusters. What that's going to do is it's going to make them all the relevant size to each other. So I'll show you what happens if they weren't the right size. So if I had this one and it was really big, you can see this square has a lot more detail now than these. We want all of these squares to be the same size on every face. So we wouldn't want this. This would be bad. Once we've got them all at least in the right shape, we can highlight everything and go Tools, Pack UVs. And yep, normalize clusters, which is going to do what I just described. Click OK. And now they're all the relevant size, and it's tried to use the most of this space here. So we can look around and see, yep, excellent. This is now perfectly mapped, that bit. And the good thing about doing it before the chamfer is if I click on the chamfer and turn it back on, we are still okay. So that's that one. Now if I click on one of the legs, you'll see the way that I built this was actually using two symmetries. So we only need to do one for it to do all the others. So if we just go down, turning off the symmetries, you'll see, and I turn that chamfer off, and even I'm going to turn this edible poly off and go to here. You can see that actually it's just started out with a little box. So what we're going to do is actually just map that box. because all this one did was move it that way a little bit. So if we start with a box, we'll end up with a nice map kind of going the other way. So add an unwrap UVW and select every polygon so we can do Control A. Now we've got another tool here, which is just box map. So if you click box map, now what I can do is open the UV editor again, select, untick the box here, select all of these faces, and now we're going to do quick peel again. And now you see it's taking each face and put them together nicely. So we're going to do the same again, tools, pack UVs, click OK, and there we go. This one's now nicely mapped. We actually would want, because this is the same object, we want these squares to match the size of these squares. So that means we're going to have to select them all and scale them quite a bit down until we roughly have the same size. So to do that, just to explain, make sure you highlight them all. You can hold Control and then that will move them the same way. If you don't hold Control, you can accidentally end up squishing them, which you don't want to do. So make sure you hold Control, take a corner, and scale them down so that we roughly have the same size layers. And then if I untick the polygon here, I can now turn back on all the modifiers, work our way up, and you'll see this is now perfectly mapped object. Alright, let's unhide everything and keep working along. So this here is going to be an orange. So we're going to want to apply a map to it that will make it work. So if you select it, right click, hide unselected, get our checker on. You can see this is not actually too bad, but it's not what we want. You can see it's all squished and everything. It's not what we want. In fact, some objects you don't really want to do a checker if you know what you're going to do with it, which we do, because if you go into your resources, you'll see we have this fruit slice here. If you drag that into your material editor, make a standard surface. So again, over here, drag in an Arnold standard surface shader and drag that into the base color. Then apply this to the sphere and make sure you show shaded in viewport. You can see now this definitely isn't working, the map that we have. We need this top part to be the cut part of the orange and this to be the rest of it. So how can we do that? Well, turn the turbo smooth off, go into the modifiers, bring in our unwrap UVW again, there, unwrap UVW, and let's work from here. So I'm going to press F4, make sure I can see my polygons. Also make sure you drag it before that turbo smooth modifier, and then select your polygon here. Click on the left and press U up here, just so that when we select, we're only going to select these faces. Now make sure you have ignore back facing turned on here, just so that you can see we select all of them. So I didn't have it there. So we want to make sure you click that so that ignore back facing is off. Now, yep, I've got all of the outer ones selected. Now what we're going to do is actually do a projection, because the way this map works is it's got a circle for the bottom part. So I'm going to click planar mapping here, and whoop, watch out, there's a little bug. Every time you click on a projection, it tries to rotate around somewhere. I don't know where, but it's really annoying. So watch out, your rotate might become a bit annoying after that. Anyway, if we click open up UV editor, you can see now we've got a circle for those maps there. I'm going to untick this planar map here so that we can then move this. I'm going to move it over here for just now, just out of the way. Now I'm going to select the top part. So the way we can actually just get the rest of these polygons is I know that all of these were the bottom ones on this, so that these ones here, if I select and highlight, that's going to select all these top ones here. Okay, and if I click planar mapping again, boom, we've got the circle. I'm going to untick. We don't need to use a quick peel because a circle is kind of square straight on, so these are fine. Now, I'm not going to choose checker pattern up here. I'm going to tick up here and then click to use the map in this UV mapping. Now what we can do is move all these UVs over where we need them. So if I move that over here, just roughly to center, then I can hold Control again to drag in and out. Now you can see we're not going in and out from the center point, but if I hold Alt, so I'm holding Control and Alt, it will let me take them in, kind of like that. So I'm going to take them in just a little bit past, just so we got some room. We don't want it. We don't want any black on any of these. So we want it to be a bit inside of the texture. I'm going to select these ones, do the same, move it just to the center, hold Control and Alt, and then click and drag, and take them in again, just so they're a bit inside of the texture. Okay, now if I untick the polygon selection here, you can see we've now got a mapped orange slice. And if you turn a Turbo Smooth on, you'll see it works. Alright, that one wasn't too bad. So let's unhide all. Just take another look at it. Look at our good work. It's pretty cool. Okay, next we're going to do this. The hat. This one's slightly more complicated and it's slightly more organic. So if you right click, hide unselected. Now again, we'll work from an easier point. So we don't want to work with all of these polygons when we're UV mapping this because it's just more hassle than it's worth. So turn off that Turbo Smooth. This edit poly is just when we reinforce the edges, so we don't want that one either. And we're going to work from this base original part here, and that's where we're going to put the UV map on top of. So add an unwrap UVW and make sure it's between these two edit polys. If you untick here, we're going to select, well, click here and we're going to work from there. So the way we're going to do this, firstly, is you kind of want to think about, imagine that if you were taking apart this hat, where would the stitching be? So I could imagine there might be stitching around this bottom part here, maybe a bit different part on the top. You'll do that a bit more next year when it comes to organic UV mapping with characters. But for just now, select your edge, double click this one here, that edge there, hold Control, click the polygon, and that's going to select the two polygons either side of those edges. Then we're going to grow our selection by clicking that here, and now we've got this cylinder part selected. What we can do is use the cylindrical mapping. So if you click that, it's going to kind of project a cylinder onto it, which will work for our purposes. So if you open the UV editor, you can see, and I know before you can move anything, you always have to untick the projection here. You can see we've got this shape. Let's just make sure we put our UV checker onto it. So this UV checker material, put that back on. Alright, so these are squished. That's not good yet. But if we select these again, and what we can do is scale it. So you want to look here and here and try and get those and just play around with it until these are square. Don't worry about the dimensions of it. It's kind of the ratio we need right now. So it doesn't matter how big it is, but it does matter the length and width of them. Just so that we end up with everything kind of nice and square. Which, yeah, I'm happy with that. That will do. Okay, now we're going to do the same, but for this cylinder part here, the bottom part. So I'm just going to hold Control and click all of these parts here. Alright, now we're going to hit that cylinder projection again. Then we get it mapped here. So then untick this cylindrical mapping. And again, we're going to do the same. Just going to move it over here. And I'm going to play with the scale until it kind of looks square. So I might want to make it a little bit smaller just so I can see, or bigger, sorry, so that I can just see the squares. So that's a little too, it's not there yet. See, it's a little squished, so I might need to make this thinner. And then there we go. They look nice and square, but we want the scale to match. So if I hold Control and just kind of roughly get it there. We can actually pack these later, which will do that for us, so don't worry about that too much, just as long as the ratio is right, that the squares are square and aren't squished in any direction. Okay, now we've got these ones left, the top and bottom. So what we can do is, because I've moved these over here, now if I highlight everything else left in here, it's going to select these two. For these ones, we can just do a projection straight from the top. So planar mapping here, click that, and then boom, we've got that nicely. If it just, again, the rotation is annoying, make sure you untick that planar mapping, press C so you can see it again. Alright, and now again, I'm just going to scale it so that these are square. And you can see that it ends up matching the shape if it's done correctly. Alright, so that's actually pretty much done and ready to pack. So if you highlight everything in here, go Tools, Pack UVs, make sure Rescale Clusters is here, click OK, and there we go. That is nicely mapped now. But the texture we're going to use for this is actually a suede texture, and if you look at that suede texture here, we're going to want this to tile quite a bit. So, because this is architectural, we'll be okay. Highlight everything here, hold Control, and drag it out a bit. So each square here, now that you can see, of the UV checker map is going to be the tiled part of the texture. So I'm just going to make it a little bit smaller than that, maybe something about there with that kind of detail. So now if I turn back this edit poly and the turbo smooth, this is one problem with the turbo smooth modifier. It can start doing this, kind of tearing the UVs, just the way that it works. So with more organic shapes, it's sometimes better to use the open subdivide as opposed to the turbo smooth. So if I show you that, just hide that turbo smooth, and then press O, skip to open subdiv. Now if you click that and increase the iterations just by 2, you can see it handles UVs much better when it adds more detail to them. So you can see it's kept that nicely compared to, if I turn it off and I show you the turbo smooth. So yeah, just know for some more organic shapes, you're better using the open subdivide as opposed to the turbo smooth. They pretty much work very similarly, but yeah, we're going to leave the open subdivide on that one. So yeah, you can see that it's got a bit of stretching up here. That really shouldn't be allowed, but for the purpose of this, we should be okay. If you did want to fix that, these layers kind of stretching up here, you could go and add another UV map on top after this with less iterations. Just so it's a little easier to work with. You'd probably select the edges, double click to get that one. Ooh. That one. Okay, that's annoying. Oh, that's because that's selected. That selects all the element. So you'd click that one, that one, that one, and then you would just have to scale. If you go to a corner, you just have to scale it up and down to fix that. And probably that one would need to be in a little bit like that. That's just if you're curious. For this level, you don't need to do that bit. But that's how to fix something like that. Now this is perfectly mapped. Okay, so let's unhide everything again. So we're looking good. Okay, next let's do this floor. We're going to add some wooding wooding flooring to this. So if you press M, firstly let's take our checker and have a look. So you can see the squares are a little squished. That's okay. Put our UV map on, unwrap UVW. It's just one plane, so we can get away with a quick peel on this one. But open your UV editor, click quick peel, and then we've got the right shape. So I don't need to checker anymore. I know that that's the right scale. So I press M. Let's make a standard surface. Bring in a standard surface. Look to your resources folder, and you'll find this wooding flooring. If you select that and drop it in to your material editor, then we want to take it into the base color. Make sure you select this map here and click Show Shaded in Viewport, and then apply it to that bottom plane. So you can see the scale isn't right. These would be giant planks of wood, so we don't want that. So with our UV unwrap UVW still open, we can select that plane face and hold Control and scale it up a bit, just to the point where we feel like those panels of wood kind of reflect the right scale. So I'm holding Control to keep the shape, and I think somewhere about there. That'll do for that one, so I'm going to untick there. Let's also apply the same texture. You should really use a different wood texture for this one, but just for the purposes of this, we'll be okay. So I'm just going to apply that to these two. And the scale's actually pretty much okay there. But if you needed to change the scale, again, you would just go into the UV mapper, open UV editor, select them all, select all of the faces even, and hold Control. Make sure you retain the right ratio, and you could just scale to the right size, but I kind of like them where they are. And let's also add that material I was talking about, the suede material, to this hat. So if you drag in another standard surface, go into your resources and take that fabric suede into here. There we go. Make sure it's in the base color. Make sure you click on that map, click Show Shaded in Viewport, and then let's apply it to that hat. There we go. That looks pretty good. This box, don't worry about it. You can just hide it or keep it there if you want. But now we need to do these walls. So this is where it gets a little more complicated. There's quite a lot going on with them. So if you select this wall, right click, hide unselected. Now, the way this wall was built, if you did it or not, was I actually started with one panel and then used symmetry to make more. So if I turn everything off back to this edit poly, you can see how it was kind of made. So I added a symmetry there, then the loops were added, and then another symmetry by another symmetry to kind of procedurally model that. So add it unwrap UVW. Press M, get your material checker out. There it is there. I'm going to apply that to the selection. Now you can see this one definitely needs UV mapped. There's no mapping here at all. You can see everything's squished there, and these I don't even know what's going on with them, but they're not showing anything. So this is an object that definitely needs mapped. So if we open the UV editor, you can see that it's just, there's no mapping. It's not working at all. Now, with something like this in architectural modeling, we're not adding any super complicated detail to any of these faces. So what we can do is actually just use this here, box map. Make sure you have every face selected firstly. So every face, Control A, polygon there. And again, really depends where you have this. Unwrap UVW, make sure that it's under that Turbo Smooth and chamfer and above everything else. So Control A on all the polygons, then hit this box map. Now, what that does is it kind of does what we did to the table, but quicker on all of them. So now we need to change the scale of this box to kind of work on every dimension. So it's a little thin that way, and then you can see on these y-axis it really needs to be increased because these are all stretched. So what you want to do is press R to get scale, still with this projection on, and we want to scale the box so that you can see on those parts there they're less squished, and we want to scale this bit up a bit. You can kind of see what's going on here now. So I'm just going to move that box a little bit just so I can see a letter. So these are still a bit squished. I'm going to scale again with R and move back just so I can check that they're about the right size as the ones on there. And I think, yeah, we're close. I need to scale up a bit just so they're square. And that looks about right. So you can see our map there. It now represents the shape of what we actually have a bit better. Okay, and we're going to be using a plaster texture, so we want this to kind of, we want all our squares to be small here. So select all of them, hold Control, and drag it just so that our squares are quite a bit smaller. So every time you see this bit, that's where it's going to repeat. So I just need it to be a little bit smaller, probably something about there. So it looks like that. Now if I untick this, what we'll do is put that material on and see how it's looking. So press M, let's bring in a standard surface, go over to your resources, find Plaster 35, drag that in. Again, make that a base color, and click on it, make sure Show Shaded and Viewport's on, and then drag it onto this object. And you can see we are looking good. This displays pretty correctly. Nice plaster texture. Okay, unhide everything else. Now we're going to do these, the kind of glass window. So make sure you just select, there's actually two bits. There's a glass window there, which it won't need mapped because it's just glass, but if you click on the outer bit here, the window, right click everything else, hide unselected. Okay, let's apply our UV checker. There we go. Make sure you can see it, and click and, well, zoom in, click and drag, put that on. You can see we definitely need a UV map because that's not looking right at all. So, add the Unwrap UVW. Put it, we want to put it before that chamfer, but after the symmetry. Okay, I'm going to turn them off just so we can see what we're working with. Again, you can see here there's an open subdivide and a turbo smooth. That's because I figured out earlier as well, this one will work better with the open subdivide for them. But for the moment, turn everything off to that Unwrap UVW and make sure it's above the symmetry. Okay, we're going to use the same. We're going to use the box method again. So select the polygon, Control A, click box here. And you can see again we need to scale it right. So press R to scale. Take it out that way so we get that squares looking about right. Scale it down, and I think we're about there. So you want to play, you can move it back and forth just so you can see the scale on each axis, right? I think we're not too bad. Yeah, that should be alright, I'm already there. So what you actually want to do is kind of really make a cube. As soon as this little gizmo here is actually a cube, it will pretty much be done. So untick that, open UV editor, have a look. Yep, looks good. And the texture we're going to use for this is actually just the same. So we want it to be kind of the same scale as the other one, which I think if I hold Control is somewhere more about that. but that's looking good. So you can see once I put that chamfer on, untick there, put that chamfer on, the difference between Turbo Smooth and Open Subdivide. Turbo Smooth has kind of destroyed the mapping there, but the Open Subdivide keeps it much nicer. So that's why I had the Open Subdivide on this object. Okay, unhide all, looks fine. Let's just apply that same plaster texture. So find where that is and click and drag it onto that window. Alright, so what you can do now is go ahead and try and do it on this wall here. So I'll give you a clue. You want to do it before the chamfer, and you probably want to change that Turbo Smooth to an Open Subdivide. So try that wall yourself, but let's go over this. This is a lot more complicated, this column. So select this column, right click, hide unselected. So this is basically just a glorified cylinder. So we're going to make sure you add the checker material, put that on there. And before this Open Subdivide and chamfer, that's where we're going to put the UV mapper. So unwrap UVW, just drag it and make sure it's after that edit poly and before that chamfer and Open Subdivide. Now we select polygon, press Ctrl A, hit the cylinder. We get something pretty quick, nice. Press R for scale and just scale it so that we have kind of the right scale. Yep, so we want the squares, something like that. Okay. Now if you turn the chamfer on and the Open Subdivide, we're good. Press M to material editor. Let's make a marble material. So I'm going to drag in another standard surface. Okay, go to your resources folder and you should find stone marble here. So just drag that into material editor. There we go. And place that into the base color. Click on the map, make sure you show shade in the viewport, and let's drag that onto there. And that scale looks about right. That's kind of nice. Okay, unhide all. And we've got a nice marble pillar there. So, with that method, go ahead and do those ones on your own. With all those techniques there, you should be able to do the rest of this on your own. And there's doors here. Try and get a wooden texture on those doors as well to make them look good. Okay, that's it for this one. I hope that all makes sense. If not, of course, send me an email, grab me, and I'll go over with you. Bye bye.